All right. Hello. You're currently listening to WRUW FM 91.1 Cleveland, broadcasting from the campus of Case Western Reserve University. You're listening to Voices and Choices, a weekly pro-choice public affairs program dedicated to sharing news and perspectives on gender, race, sexuality, arts, culture, and social justice. We believe in the importance of public awareness and conversation about these issues. We aim to foster a forum for discussion where we can raise voices and perspectives that are otherwise not heard and encourage action that will generate change. I am your host, Matt Hook. My usual co-host, Dot Martin, and Dr. David Miller couldn't make it today, so I'll be holding down the fort. Got two fantastic guests today from 12 Literary Arts in Cleveland, yes. Eric Odum and Stephanie Ginese.
Hi.
Hello.
So can you first just talk about how both of you got involved in 12 Literary Arts?
You want to start, Stephanie?
Sure. So I actually got involved by attending a free workshop at the Lewis Stokes Library downtown, which was put on by local poet Keisha Nicole Foster, who was also working with 12. And so we just got to talking about what I wanted out of writing and what kind of work I was looking for. And she said, I have to introduce you to Daniel, who's our executive director. And then all was just history after that.
I love the twang at the end.
Yeah.
As far as how I got involved with 12, I was there before 12 became a thing. Initially, I was doing the One Mic Open mic, and slam series, and that was something that initially was born at Cleveland School of the Arts when Daniel was still an instructor there. So he kind of passed that off to me. And I did that for a few years. And then, he said, hey, I got this nonprofit that I'm starting to get off the ground. I want One Mic Open and you to be a part of it. And then he kind of rolled me into the process when he was working on still trying to get that 501c3 status, that coveted 501c3 status. And then I've been involved with 12 ever since.
Great. And can you just quickly talk about the mission of 12 Literary Arts for listeners who are unfamiliar?
There's so many different ways to put it. So I think that the best way to put the mission of 12 Literary Arts is to not only reach out to people and kind of change and influence their lives with the literary arts or the arts in general. It's also to make them better members of their community, make them more aware of the actions that they are able to take and the power that their voice has. And we're all about highlighting that voice and finding different ways to incubate that voice and that talent, regardless of if it be a literary artist or if it be someone who's, going into politics or going into activism or things of that nature. So that's like the long-winded version of it.
But I know a lot of the focus is on poetry and specifically slam poetry, right?
Yeah. Poetry and poetry slams are a big part of the youth education component.
And I was wondering if you could talk about that because you guys are actually sending a team to a national slam poetry event in Las Vegas soon, right?
Yes. That is Brave New Voices. I think that's happening from the 17th or 18th to the 21st in July. And this is our 5th year sending a team there. And Brave New Voices is, in a nutshell, the largest youth poetry slam event, period. There are youth from all over the U.S. and other countries that come in. There can be sometimes upwards of 600 just youth there, not counting all the adults and everything to go ahead and back them up. And then we have these events, these workshops, these community events, just a bunch of different things to kind of like blow their head up and really get them exposed to different arts and networking with youth from different areas. And then, of course, there's the slam, but whatever, right? It's just a competition.
And slam poetry, I guess what differentiates slam poetry from spoken word? Because are they different or are they the same thing?
I see you. Do you have an opinion on this?
I'm not as well versed in like slam poetry, but it's more like the competitive sport of poetry, right? Where spoken word is more like showcasing. So slam is like competition, scores attached, all that good stuff, ego, bragging rights.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's just it. A slam is an event. Poetry is poetry. Is poetry. There's not different degrees or different like levels of acceptability for poetry depending on the event. So like slam poetry, I feel like would really like corner somebody into, oh, so you're loud and expressive with everything you do, and that's not necessarily the case. So I would say slam is an event. Slam is not a type of poetry.
All right. It's specific. So are there rules? So if slam poetry is an event or it's a competition, but it does that, I guess, do those rules foster a type of poetry in and of itself? Like, is there a time limit to the poems or things like that?
Yes. So typically for the youth slams, the time limit is 3 minutes and 30 seconds with a 10-second grace period. So you got basically about 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and that's a long time on stage. I think the reason why we even attach that time limit in the first place is because we know that people can talk for a while and they can keep going and going. So there might not be a really good way to cut off a youth who is on stage trying to express what they're doing. Like, all right, so you've said enough at 5 minutes, but you've said enough at 3 minutes. So it was basically just kind of be like, look, here's the space. Here's how long we have it. We got to set some sort of time limit on it. And I guess that's where the 3:30 came from.
Yeah.
It seems like enough time.
Try to make the most impactful piece you can in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Try to say the most without saying the most.
Because we already have a bunch of people that say the most to us and say nothing at all.
Right.
And, of course, great writing is often really concise, and that kind of teaches you how to do that. So,
Yeah.
are both of you involved directly in teaching young people poetry?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last year I was in 2 different high schools, one on the west side and then one on the east side. But yeah, we had students signing up for this workshop. We took over an English class twice a week, which was really cool, and taught them about poetry. And it's really about getting them to express their stories, which a lot of time they're not allowed to do in academic writing. We want them to write how they talk. If they use the word ain't when they talk, they can use it in a poem, which they can't do, in academic writing. So it really frees up the space and allows them to really bring in the artistry and imagination into like words and writing.
Ooh, yes. And what I did was primarily I managed the relationships with those schools and developed our new partnerships going into new high schools and things like that. And then my teaching as far as with the youth was more so in the fellowship that we have. Which happened after school. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 7:30.
Can you talk a little bit more about that fellowship?
Yeah. So the One Mic Open After School Fellowship was the first program that we really put together at like 12 Literary Arts. And the goal of it is to find those youth that need that sort of special development or need that sort of special attention, or they have this kind of this way about them, this spark about them. And they're considered what we call orchids. And we always try to find those and foster those in a space, after school, outside of school, so they can build their own sort of community. And they'll do things very arts mastery heavy, working on things, talking about like race and gender and things of that nature, but also working on poetry techniques and reading from poets like Thomas Sayers Ellis and things of that nature.
Great. And how long does a fellowship like that usually last? Like,
this past the 2018-19 school year, it started in October, if I'm not mistaken, and it concluded in June. So it typically starts towards the middle of fall, and it'll end basically around prom and graduation season in May or June.
Great. And one thing I know you also work with I know you work with something different. It's not a fellowship. Is it one of the artist in residence programs there? It's the Hannah Smith Writer in Residence program for poets and writers of color. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, Barbara Smith. Yeah.
My bad.
No, you're cool. It's a lot. It's a long-winded title, but yeah, the Barbara Smith Writers in Residence program is really awesome. We have submissions. So we have 2 residents who we're currently working with right now. From the Northeast Ohio area. So there will be 2 writers every year from Northeast Ohio, and then 2 writers from outside of Northeast Ohio. So we're looking more nationally. I think it's a really great way that we're able to foster a relationship with the writing community outside of Cleveland and let them know that like Cleveland is a literary hub, and there's so many great experiences, events, people to meet, a lot of inspiration here if you go looking for it. So we really kind of want to open the gate and let people know that like Cleveland is here, come to Cleveland, have your residency, explore it, work with 12, work with the youth in the city if that's what you're open to. And then also giving that space to writers here in Northeast Ohio, I think is really important as well, because they do receive a stipend. So it's a 3-month residency with a $5,000 stipend and a workspace. If they are outside of Northeast Ohio, we offer them an apartment space as well. So I think it's a really great way to honor the work that a lot of writers of color are doing in the nation and here at home as well. and honor that and recognize it.
Oh, yeah. And especially when we're talking about working with the youth as well, I think that's very important because then you give people an opportunity to see, hey, this is a mentor who has a similar experience that I do.
Yeah. Opening the youth of our city and giving them the exposure to like these writers.
Yep.
These adult writers and these people that they can kind of see as role models. Because I know growing up, I didn't have a ton of writing role models who looked like me, had my same experiences, came from my same kind of culture and background. So I think it's important for people to have that, especially the youth now.
Definitely.
So I know you both brought in poems as well to read on air. I was wondering if you each want to share those now.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely.
Go ahead, Eric.
I gotta
Set
go
the
first.
tone.
All right. Bet. All right, let me adjust this so I can see. Okay. When viewing other galaxies, one may notice, if they've the power of years and a griot's mind, they are speeding away as the fabric of our universe expands, always making space. One day we'll look up into a void instead of a sea of stars. Our wonder will be challenged. Imagination forced to evolve these days. I've started by seeing more sunrises. I never really noticed them until years felt like months. Time suddenly aware of me, runs to catch up with my joints, lodge itself in my muscles, time squeezing in between each heartbeat, keeping tally. I wake up before the sun does, hope to catch time slipping, catch a few moments that won't run through my hands like sand. As finite beings, we cower to conceive how we'll supernova into stardust one day, how our memory will become a nebula. The older I get, more I expand, the further I feel from everything. It's scary to fly alone, a galaxy clinging to the black backdrop of space being towed in its wake. I don't venture to understand celestial bodies. I try to reconnect with mine, try to reach far back and remember the days that don't hurt. Let heavy memories sink and drown in all the tears they've ever wanted and gotten. Remember how important holding on to joy is, so if all the stars descend to darkness and become cold, I'll curate a night sky with my new constellations. They will be my chosen family, a pantheon of new gods, the beginning again, and maybe, even then, near the end of it all, the starless sky will manage not to seem so empty. Yes, thank you. Woo!
So can you tell me the story behind that poem?
I'm not old. I'm not old, but I'm also not young anymore. Like I'm 28, so there's a good number of people that still look at me and say, "Oh, you don't know nothing. You know, you're still young. You got time." And then younger people are like, "You were born in 1990? Growth." So it's just like I've noticed the older I get, time really does slip past more and more when you're not paying attention to it, when you're not in the moment. So this was kind of the way that I'm viewing it. Like, I know that the world is expanding and the world is kind of, you know, growing at our purview and the way that we view things. And I guess I'm just trying to find a way to slow that down or slow my perception of that down so that I can really learn to enjoy all these moments. So that at the end of it all, if I have nothing left, I at least have like those moments that I lived in and celebrated.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much for sharing. And
Thank you.
That poem was fantastic. Stephanie, do you want to share yours as well?
Yes, go Stephanie!
This is titled Smoke Break. It's been 5 years of tongue biting, tucking myself into agreeable embers. Sometimes I plan a loud exit, and a pompous middle finger reaches up to God to let her know I am liberated. Freedom is a taste in the mouth, but never the actual weight of the meal. I want to dip my freedom into melted butter, let the fat run down my chin, a burning river, like the one my city is most known for. What does it say about a place where the water is a soft hell? Today I will work 10 hours, turn my voice up a note so as not to offend the gentle silver of white women in wedding bands, their ears untrained in the tones of abandonment and adobo on everything. I speak in stepped-on cigarette syllables, spin a scorched roach rhythm found in the cup holder of your car, so you can imagine, nobody wants to hear these carbon-pressed chords served with dinner, searing through a superior cut of meat, ashing on a perfectly polished plate. Thanks.
Excuse you? Go. Yes.
The adobo on everything hit close to home for me, I must say.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm here.
yeah.
I'm seen.
Are you Latinx yourself?
Yes, my mom's Ecuadorian.
Hey, where am I? Here we go.
We're both half Puerto Rican, so yeah, I grew up adobo on
literally in my cabinet at the moment.
I was helping my parents move to a new house, and in our spice cabinet, there were 5 different containers of adobo.
Because you gotta have the one there's like sin pimento, con pimento.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you got the low salt when you really care.
Right. The one that goes on fish.
A Badio one just for variation from the Goya.
Right.
You try to mix your own so you don't spend so much money anymore. That never works.
Never works.
Never works.
So what's the story behind that poem?
So for the past 5 years, I had been working in the service industry, bouncing between some restaurants here in Cleveland. This was written probably a few weeks before I was like, all right, I'm finally done. And I could do poetry writing, working with 12 full time. And I also read tarot on the side. So that's my other side hustle. So I could do those things full time and not have to work in the service industry anymore. So I think I was coming to that place of just, I'm ready to be done with this, close this chapter. I mean, it's a great experience, and shout out to all my service industry folks out there. Y'all are real ones. But it definitely takes a toll on you. So that was kind of my ode poem to all my service industry peeps.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Now we're going to take a quick music break, listen to some Fresh Produce, local Cleveland hip-hop group that has actually worked with 12 literary arts.
Hey, y'all.
So, dude decides to clean his ride. Saturday around noon, decides to take a drive. Cruise past, seeing shorty walking and says hi. He sees that she is feeling him, emotions come inside. She always liked his style, always felt his vibes. And she sees that he's got bad intentions in his eyes. It don't matter, cause maybe in that one night she can get that chance to be that one woman in his life. They dream of the ocean, sweet coasting the horizon line. Toasting, sipping the sweetest Hawaiian wine, if that even exists. She swore she saw the light in his kisses and hopes that God grants a wish, and one day he'll be calling a miss. They playing phone tag, fall back, they sending love letters, storms that weather together. Christmas, they bought each other sweaters like some junior high story Cinderellas, no controlling them. Love's got a hold of them and holding them close. It's like
replaying in her mind scenes from the first time. Effortless pleasure make her rewind to springtime. Unfolding secrecy she hold beneath the creases. Emotional releases flow until the feeling ceases. She misses him, me Jones back, messages and phone tag. Reminisce what life was like before when they ain't going back. She never met a king in the rough sparkling. Part the seam, raise the light, replace the night for brighter dreams. The first man to give before he even took from her. Brothers run away, can't even get a look from her. And all the girls he used to check out get X'd out, making room for the Bonner bloom. Them chicks would never let sprout. Aura's glowing, love is growing, unafraid of where they going. Seeds planted over seasons, he sees that she is showing connected perfection, past, future, present. Two souls stepping in the new roles and true blessings.
All right, so that song you just heard was Fresh Produce, Black Love, off their album 4080. And today you're listening to Voices and Choices on WRUW. I'm joined by two guests from 12 Literary Arts, Eric and Stephanie.
Hi again.
Hello.
So how with young people in poetry, I feel like it's always hard because poetry is very personal, especially that type of like confessional poetry that a lot of times that you guys were doing. How do you get people to kind of open up like that, especially when they're young, and that's a very hard thing to do when you're at that age?
Bless. Oof. You want me to start? You want to start? You should start.
Okay.
I'm talking a lot.
It's fine. I feel like telling them that their stories are important. They have to understand that. A lot of the times they're told maybe at home, maybe at school by other adults that their opinions, their voices don't necessarily matter, that we know what's best for them. So, when I step into a classroom of young people, I really try to validate their experience, offer them the space to the fact that they're able to share their experience and write it down. I always try to encourage that. Even talking to students, just having conversation with them, asking them about their day, asking them what's been up, why maybe they're moody, what's going on. Just willing to listen to them and letting them know the importance of their voice, I feel like is the way to kind of at least get them to accept the idea of opening up.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You have to make them feel not only safe, but you have to make them feel safe in a genuine way. Because so many people throw out the term safe space and creating safe space or whatever, but it's just a buzzword to get people to go to said space. They don't really know how to maintain or manage a safe space. And a safe space is not one where you're not challenged. That's the other thing. You typically are going to what is called a safe space, and there's no conflict, whatever, no disagreements, no nothing. Everyone has the same ideas and thought processes. But with the type of spaces that we like to create, be it in the classroom or at the fellowship, it's really about creating a space where we know where the limits are, we know where the boundaries are, because we are people. And it's not because they are young people. They are they're going to be adults. They have thoughts and opinions. They have emotions that need to be expressed and not stifled. It's just all we're there to do is to keep the space safe so that they can do whatever they need to do within it to really express themselves.
And you're also talking about people who are from that age of 14 and 19, when you first start going away from the beliefs of your parents as well. Instead of just kind of parroting everything they say, which always makes for an interesting conversation all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's like at first you were changing their diapers and now they're like, I hate you, Mom. It's like, oh, God.
But there are a lot of emotions. We don't give enough credit to young people and the things that they're going through. That we think because they don't have to pay bills that they're not experiencing a lot of pain or a lot of stress or a lot of just frustration. But they're dealing with things we don't necessarily have to worry about. They're figuring out who they are. They're dealing with social media. They're dealing with bullying. They're dealing with their schools not even being physically safe. Forget about emotionally safe. They have to go to school and wonder, is this the day I'm going to lose my life, or some of my friends will?
And especially in a city like Cleveland, too, with so many just structural problems and systematic inequality here that's just rampant throughout the school system. It's weird to think that, kids' emotions are less than because they don't have rent. Well, their parents do, and I'm sure they hear about their parents all the time and what they're going through.
That secondary stress, being just exposed to it by living in the same household or even in the same neighborhood. Just because something hasn't happened to you directly doesn't mean that it doesn't affect your neighborhood. And when it affects your neighborhood, it affects literally everyone in your community, because you're like, oh, that happened here. That can happen to people here. That can happen to me.
Right.
Yeah.
But growing up in a place like Cleveland, our current Barbara Smith writer in residence, Cortez Harris, is writing a poetry chapbook entitled "We Made It to Public School Alive." So in that, body of work, he's expressing, forget about even going to school and managing that, the walk from home to school, or what they may face at home, or what they may face on that journey to even get to school, what they face when they walking through a metal detector.
Or even in their homes, or we have a city where 15% of kids that are tested got poisoned by the lead in the places that they're supposed to be living in. It's ridiculous. So, is that the kind of stuff that a lot of times you focus on in your work with young people?
Yeah, I think we definitely try to get them to see the poetic, I guess, inspiration in, what's going on in the city. What are you mad about? What is affecting your life? What do you want the adults to know? They may say things, they write poems about how they feel discriminated against at school. They write poems about dress code. They write poems about what's going on at home. They write poems about abuse, about suicide. Family members and friends being killed, law enforcement. They really have a lot to
exploring
talk about.
And expressing their sexual identity, their orientation, the given way that they identify, the way that people, primarily, us millennials, because millennials are not the 14, 15, 16-year-olds anymore. They're the people who are approaching their 30s or already in their early 30s. And there's still some of us who are trying to navigate the transparency of these identities that they're talking about. So like every time they get on stage, we're still learning too. And in order for you to really connect with the youth and really like, you know, highlight their voice and make sure that they feel safe is to like listen to what they're saying and to enact what they're saying. I think.
Yes.
Never know how to end statements. Just like period.
Yeah.
It's like every piece of writing. So the end is always the most annoying part of it.
The worst. You're like, and the last line.
Just swear. You're just like there. Your beads of sweat are just dripping down. It's like
I need it to end.
We got to wrap this up.
Wrap it up, dude. Sorry, I was thinking on Migos.
So speaking of, so in poetry, as far as like teaching them structure and technique, you mentioned that's a lot different, Stephanie, than academic writing. Mm-hmm. So can you like describe a little bit about that and what makes an effective poem different than an effective essay on the same experience or topic?
Yeah. So an essay, you're going to have to maybe cite some things. You have to have maybe some like concrete evidence. Poetry allows for the space for you to just feel. It could be true. It could not be true. It could be a lie. It could not. It could be a fact. It's really the interpretation of the writer and then the interpretation of the audience. I think that they're allowed to maybe curse. They're allowed to drop in slang. They're allowed to even separate words and put in, you know, icons or different symbols. You know, anything you can find on a keyboard, you can put it in your poem.
Right.
You can put numbers. You can put symbolism. I think it's just a really great way for them to kind of deconstruct language and see it as more of an art form as opposed to something that they have to use to communicate their point across.
I agree. I agree. And I think really that the best answer to that is that when you merge the two, when you find a way to bridge this, you know, collegiate academic writing with some of the creative elements of poetry, that's where you find, I think that's where better education happens in general, especially in schools, having that art component in there. I feel like if there was more of that art component, it wouldn't make the essay writing so daunting and feel like, oh my God, I don't want to write about the Scarlet Letter. I don't care about Hester Prynne or her A.
No.
Like, I don't
Nobody
care.
cares about the Scarlet
I don't
Letter.
care about her. But if you find a way to be able to like, okay, well, who in your community has been branded with that A? And they're like, oh. And then that becomes their essay. It's like finding a way to take the mundane, because at this point, it can be a bit mundane to go over the same classical novels all the time, but it's about finding a different way to approach it, and I think that's really how you get the best out of both worlds.
Oh yeah, like it, and also like maybe take some like the language techniques that are used in classical novels to be like, hey, how can you apply, you know, Shakespeare inventing words into what you're doing here?
Exactly.
And
That's the other thing. You can invent words. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to. I've put words in poems, and I'm like, that's definitely not a word, but it sounds dope. And I'm
You're like, what tense is this? I
who
don't
said right. And you're like, it's not the correct tense, but it just kind of makes sense. And the way you can, you know, describe something without it like really making any sense when you think about it. Like, it's not logical, and that's the beauty of poetry. Because academic writing does have to be logical.
Yes. That part, unfortunately.
I guess the one other thing that I guess sticks out to me about poetry is that unlike fiction writing where you have to make a plot and deal with all the annoying things about dialogue.
These
poetry,
characters.
Characters I have to make up. It's like poetry, since I'm a journalist and I do a fair amount of creative nonfiction stuff, it's like you can, with poetry, it's more like in that vein where you can take things that you're seeing and then write about it, which might make it more accessible than a lot of the fiction stuff that is kind of always put in the education system.
Yeah.
I noticed.
Yeah, like fiction takes, I don't know, fiction takes so much just raw creativity, and there's not really any medium through. Oh, and time.
And it's nice that these kids, you know, can feel like, you know, maybe they relate some of the poetry back to maybe the music that they're listening to. It can be short. It can be condensed. You can say a lot in 3 lines.
And it can matter.
And getting them to understand that, yeah.
Right.
That's the one thing I love about what you guys are doing, putting poetry in schools more, because you're showing people, hey, there's a version of creative writing that is not fiction. And that's something that a lot of, at least when I was in high school, I didn't really know that well. Because I was there, we never really went over poetry.
Right.
The poetry we went over would be like, you know, the Emily Dickinson type 1800 stuff.
It's like, God bless them, but
Right. And like we have people who are alive in between.
who are writing really
Willie Perdomo's right there. Like
Listen, Sandra Cisneros, Loose Woman,
literally
like,
sitting
come on.
right there.
yeah, like those old masters are great, but there are also new people we should talk about.
Right.
Especially because young people are able to relate to that more.
Yeah, I'm not writing at a lap desk with my quill pen and my French poodle while I eat chocolate for breakfast.
Listening to the horses gallop down towards the bay.
No, like I'm sitting at a coffee shop trying to like not make my eye twitch.
Dealing with the stresses of taxes.
Yeah.
So speaking of, what is both of your writing processes? Because I know we talked a little bit about that before going in the studio.
Oy.
Go ahead, Eric. You start.
Writing process. So, a lot of the times there's two main components that really like inspire me to, get it going, to get to writing. The first is, and it sounds cliche when you say it, but in practice it helps, is to live life, to actually live life. Not to just go through experiences to say that you've gone through an experience, but to like be present in each moment, which is very difficult to do. It's like, stop worrying about what you have to do in an hour. What are you doing in this hour? So living life and kind of taking those moments and experiencing that stuff. And then at the same time, it's music that really kind of sets things off. It's almost like putting a soundtrack to those thoughts that I've had. So, for example, like I was mentioning outside before we got into the studio, Flying Lotus's latest album was really a huge source of inspiration for like the past 2 or 3 pieces. And that's normally how it'll be. Like really good art inspires me to also make what I would say is pretty good art. Once I sit down and start writing, it's normally that I'll have a first line in mind and then just kind of bang it out and then leave it alone for a while, go back to reread it, edit it, and do all that stuff later. But the writing process normally happens pretty quick once it starts. So, yeah, living life, music, and then getting into the right headspace to just kind of let things flow without needing to stop.
Yeah. For me, it is, we talked about how I like silence when I write.
Yes.
But I do journal. So I keep a journal that I try to write in a couple times a week. Usually just free thought. So a lot of my poetry will come from that. I have my quick memo in my phone is just chock full of lines and little pieces, song lyrics, reading other books. So reading books not about poetry or poems by other poets. So just reading books outside of the subject really inspires me. History inspires me. The ugly parts of history, we'll just specify that. My family. And so just sitting down, I need silence. I usually need something to drink, probably coffee. And I just try to, like you said, bang it out, pull from my journal. I'll have it next to me open, leafing through some of my like most recent entries, trying to find some inspiration there. I'll write them in my phone. Sometimes I try to text them because the greatest thing that happens to me is that inspiration strikes while I'm driving. So I have to like open it and like put the voice memo on and start talking, and then it like screws up some of the lines.
You hit a bump and someone cuts you off and start cussing into the phone.
It's hard to find time being a working mom, but my kids do a really good job of keeping themselves entertained. They're like, okay, Mom, you can write now.
Oh my God. Your kids are just like angels.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it.
They are literal angels. I feel like I gave birth to my guardian angels, and it's kind of the cutest thing. But yeah.
That's a poem.
That is a poem.
That is a poem. Oh my God.
This is my process. Conversation is definitely my process.
That's a big thing too. Conversation.
Shit other people. Sorry, I didn't mean to say the S word. Things other people say.
Stuff.
Did I reach the delay in time?
Sorry.
Apologies. Get into the flow of stuff.
Class with
Oh
students.
God.
And I'm like, I'm sorry. And they're like, it's cool. We say worse.
It's fine. I've cursed on air before. I got away with it in DC. I don't think I'll get away with it here. So I haven't tried my luck here.
Fair. They're gonna let one word go. They're fine. They're fine. We're human.
But anyway, so what authors have been inspiring the both of you lately?
Specific authors, I have always been really bad at just naming specific authors that inspire me. It's more so like poems that I'll read or pieces of art from people, more times than not, it ends up being musical artists that inspire me versus poets. Like I'll get ideas and techniques maybe from some poets, like Thomas Sayers Ellis, his poem "Or," kind of the way techniques and structure I'll take from other writers. But as far as like raw inspiration or stuff, like it's more so musical artists like Anderson .Paak and Flying Lotus and hell, even Lizzo,
Lovely.
Tierra Whack, all of them.
The authors that I typically like, Sandra Cisneros, like I mentioned, is one of my faves. She's just amazing. I used to be obsessed when I was like 9 years old. Edgar Allan Poe was like,
me as well.
I went through that like super goth, like I'm dark
Mask
and
of the Red
different.
Death is a bop.
Oh, man, let me tell you. So that's definitely one of my favorite authors. A lot of contemporary, like there's so many great poets out right now.
I was gonna say like Edgar Allan Poe, out of all the old like elementary, like
Yeah.
he's aged. He actually ages well.
He
I feel
ages
like.
well.
I feel like he ages
Because
really
we stay
well.
emo.
Like, it's not gonna change.
It's not gonna change. Like, yeah, I've definitely wanted to stuff some people in a cellar. I'm just saying. We've all been there.
We have great poets today, like Ginese Smith.
Oh, Donna Smith. Any poem of his, I'm just like, I could eat this. This could nourish me.
Oh, and then Stephanie Ginese. I don't know if you've
Eric
met her.
Odum.
Like, she's right here.
Yeah, there's so many great poets. I mean, a lot of like Jamila Woods is a great poet, also a great musical artist. Fatima Asghar is like, damn. There's just
so many.
There's no excuse to not be into poetry right now. There's literally something for everybody.
Yeah, just find some.
Find some. It's
Start
great.
reading.
Just go on. Like, what's a good source for people who are trying to get into poetry then?
The public library.
I knew that's just gonna be it.
I'm a real big library advocate. It is like, it's an amazing resource that I don't think we utilize enough of. But if you go to their new releases section, they have like what is currently on in Willie Perdomo, Haila Alan, just a lot of great poets. And poets.org.
Yes, poets.org is a good online source of stuff. And then if you wanted to, I like listening to poetry more. So YouTube, Button Poetry, looking up Brave New Voices, 2000, whatever you want to put in, 4, 5, 6. They've been around for years. Seeing what the youth poets are doing, looking up Rust Belt, looking up Southern Fried, things of that nature. Like looking up different events. There's a lot of them that are recorded nowadays. So that's a good way to get into it too.
And speaking of events, I know you all at 12 Literary Arts are having an event soon.
Come on.
Yes, that was a great segue.
Yes, Sunday, July 14th is our Youth Slam Team's send-off showcase. They're going to be performing some of the pieces that they have been working on since March and that they're going to be taking to the festival in Las Vegas this July. So yeah, that's Sunday, July 14th. Doors open at 5 p.m. and it's happening at the Madison, so 1464 East 105th, part of, Glenville's growing art campus.
Come check out the Glenville Arts Campus.
Free, by the way.
It's free.
So July 14th, free at the Madison.
Yes, and there's an open mic beforehand, so if you get there on time, you can have a seat and you can sign up.
Maybe we'll read some poems. Who knows?
Maybe. I don't know.
So that's great. Any other big events coming up or any? I know both of you are working on books currently. Anything?
We are
Yes.
working on books. So if there's anybody listening out there who's a
Publishers.
or just wants to help, hit us up.
Honestly, because my book is done.
Yeah, 12arts.org, and you can find our email.
Odum at 12arts.org.
Yes. We were both just got news. We've been published together a lot. Not together like we wrote a poem together, but in the same publication. So we were both just published in Palabritas, which is the Latinx literary journal out of Harvard.
Wow.
And we just got word today that we were going to be published in this really great zine coming out of Chicago called Las Caras Lindas, which is about the Puerto Rican identity and Puerto Ricans on the island and the diaspora. So
we are just out here.
We are out here.
That's fantastic. So congratulations. So each of your books, are they both done and you're just in like the publishing hell kind of stage of it right now?
Mine is done. I'm getting some illustrations done. Just because I think it'll be an extra component that I really don't see in a lot of poetry books. But yeah, like the primary barrier right now is Where the publishers at?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of poems. It's also finding the ones that work together that I want to put in the collection as a comprehensive thing. Thinking about making like maybe something small, like a DIY zine type feel with like maybe like 10, 15 poems. Okay. Just start small. Then I'm ready for that book deal whenever y'all are ready. So hit me up.
Oh, listen, booked and busy.
I'm just trying to just write. So if you have any space for me to do that, to write and read my poetry, I am in.
Put an ISBN on my book, please. Hold on, give me an ISBN number.
I just want to go on a book tour. I have a lot of outfits picked out. So
honestly, there's so many places I still have to visit.
So yeah.
Get as many cities as you can. So what's the concept behind each of your books of poetry? Do you have like a prospective title?
The collection that I have done right now is called After. And we're going to go there. So that collection was written kind of as my own personal response to getting a positive HIV diagnosis. And my response to not only adjusting to living with that, but also how other people seem to have to adjust to me living with that. So a lot of those poems are about identity and how people relate to that identity. But also some of it is just pure reads that people need to be told about themselves. So I think it's 10 or 11 pieces in there, and each poem afterwards there is some creative nonfiction where there's more of a story about it. Like, here's the poem, but here's the story that led to this poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Ugh, I can't wait to read that, hold that, and digest that. Mine deals a lot with just, I guess, for it being my first collection, it's almost like an introductory. Like, here I am, here's me, here's my experience. Being first generation Latina and Italian, because there's that language cultural barrier with my dad, who's from Italy.
So close,
and
but
then
so far.
being, I had my first son when I was 21. So just being a mom at that age, going through the welfare system, going through school, going through relationships, just trying to navigate this space and come out of every obstacle alive and well, and making sure nobody is going to be scarred for life from it. So that's what my book's about.
So you got to have trigger warnings in the very front on the cover of your book.
Right.
Watch out,
like a lot of stuff: domestic violence, rape culture, religion, sexuality,
necessary things to unpack.
So it's just mostly like me unpacking sort of what I've been through, and I feel like it's a story a lot of people can relate to.
Oh yeah. And especially since Puerto Rican and Italian both very strong Catholic upbringing.
Strong Catholic upbringing, and I consider myself now more like pagan-based, religious-wise. Yeah, bruja.
Yes.
Dabble in the craft and all that fun stuff. So it's really, a lot about that, about sex, growing up with that shame, that Catholic shame of sex, but then also like me discovering my identity as like a bisexual woman.
How dare we be queer and Catholic?
How dare we be queer, Catholic, and of color?
What? It's like, so y'all don't want an easy life, huh?
We're asking for...
Clearly we're asking for the struggle.
So that good old-fashioned Catholic guilt.
Catholic guilt. You know it.
All sins are... Like, get out of my face. I don't want to hear that.
But yeah, the upbringing with church was kind of weird because I saw out the religion more so than my parents took me to it. Huh. Like, I went after it and found community and like solace inside the church. So it's really kind of like a different thing. Yeah, weird. My mom did not. I had to get rides to church.
Oh.
My friends were like, "Oh, is your mom just not home?" And I was like, "No, she's home. She's sleeping. She's not taking me."
My mom was like, "Do you want to go to church?"
Yeah.
It's like, all right, thanks.
Oh my God. So again, for all the publishers out there.
Run it. Look, we're so charismatic. We can do a book tour and talk about things. It'd be great.
Joined today by Eric Odum and Stephanie Ginese from 12 Literary Arts, talking about poetry, art, creativity, and working with young people in the Cleveland area about how to create and tell their own stories.
Yeah. Tell your stories more.
Period.
So, I know I asked you both about how you got involved in 12 Literary Arts, but how did you each get involved in writing in the first place?
How did you get involved in writing in the first? Wait, yeah.
Well,
I don't even know this.
So I've just been writing since I was probably like 9, 10 years old, just writing stories. I wrote a short story about a sculptor in Italy who sees this phantom woman who ends up being like a prostitute. And it was like real deep, and I thought it was going to be a book. But I just always wanted to be a writer. I would carry notebooks around and just write song lyrics, shitty, angsty, teenage emo poetry. And that was that. I always knew since day one. It was like, I want to be a writer. I got to find a way to make this happen. Life kind of took me on a different path, and I didn't know if I'd ever come back.
Right.
And the fact that I've been able to is like, little 9-year-old Steph is so happy right now.
I think for me, it might have been like there were like two moments, I would say. Initial exposure to poetry happened in the 3rd grade with my English teacher. Of course, I remember her name. Her name was Miss Cole. Miss Cole was the baddest. Okay, she had us dress up as like I had to do a report on Julius Caesar, so she encouraged me to dress up as Julius Caesar. It was so cute. But it was that teacher that kind of encouraged the arts and creativity in that Catholic school environment. Because I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten to 8th grade. So that's also where I kind of got exposed to poetry. It was a very interesting space to be. So I got started with that and wrote this haiku. It was cool or whatever. She laminated it. Really gassed me up. My mom still has it somewhere, I think. And then for a while, I kind of let it go. And then around 8th grade, there was really a need for it because of things that were happening at home with other individuals and experiences that I was going through and trying to process. And poetry was kind of the only outlet that really made sense, that really worked. And got me the attention that I needed. Got me the attention that I needed, positive attention, like positive reinforcement, because the sort of attention that I was getting outside of that was very negative and very harmful. So without poetry, I kind of don't feel like I would have made it to this point. I know it sounds really dramatic to say, but it's also true.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
That's what
I think,
art is.
yeah, both of us understand like the lifeline of writing.
Yeah.
For us, I mean, you'll hear musicians say like, music saved my life, you know.
Yep.
Any artist is kind of like, it's just been there. So when you really do this, like, it's just kind of like you're born with it almost. It's that gene.
It's right there.
It's one of like the extra helixes of your DNA.
That's what it
We're
is.
supposed to have 12. You know that, right? That's a whole nother episode. Never mind.
Wait, what?
What?
Live on air readings. Listen, let me tell y'all.
I was gonna say, like, completely random aside. That like pagan, like tear stuff. That seems to be coming back hard.
Yeah,
like
I
just
think
from like
people are realizing the freedom within it and understanding that like you can't always look to an outside source for the answers. You kind of have to go within.
Yes.
To like, you know, you're an expert at your experiences, which is something Daniel says all the time, but you're also like an expert with like who you are. Nobody else can kind of tell you what works for you and what doesn't. We don't like rules. We're not meant to be so structured. That was different gods came and they're trying to keep us from the truth.
Yes.
I could go on forever.
See, this
be
is
like
why
an ancient aliens
I'm
episode.
scheduling a reading. Okay. I got crystals all over my house. I've saged recently. I'm feeling good, refreshed.
Yeah. Get you that summer reading.
Okay. What am I going to do with my life? Oh, we don't have enough cards for this.
There's 78. There's an answer.
We got it. It's in there somewhere.
It's in there somewhere. There's 78 of them.
I know that's right.
But it's interesting because there's so many different like forms of that stuff too. Where you get like the Nord like black metal people who are into that stuff,
Oh,
but then you got
yeah.
like the new age types, where it's
Yeah.
like crystal hippies, and it's like you're both
Chai
going
tea
to
and
this.
love.
Yeah.
You're both going to like the same type of thing from such different worlds. It's interesting.
Yeah, some people get kind of bummed out about like the new wave of like witchcraft and things of that nature, and they're like, oh, these people are just doing it for the aesthetic. I'm like, so what if somebody is finding healing in like a crystal and maybe just journaling and like doing meditation, but if that makes them happier and they walk through their day in more light and more positivity and they're able to bring that out and spread it, amen. Like, listen, as long as we stop doing harmful things and killing
That
our
part.
planet, doesn't matter what we're doing.
Let's worry about that.
Let's worry about
How
that
about that?
first. Then you can worry about going to Space Force. Let's worry about right here.
Y'all out here concerned about these new people getting into it. Meanwhile, do you know where it came from? Brujeria.
A quick reminder that the preceding views and opinions expressed on the show are only those of the producers and guests and are not necessarily those of Case Western Reserve University, WRUW FM, and its staff or management.
We actually said that there might be a disclaimer.
Literally.
We did say that. Because we were like, they put us together.
They know what they did?
To represent 12.
Okay.
And this radio station. So thank you all.
So let us know. Yes, but so what I said.
So to go back to 12 literary arts, speaking of that, instead of neo-paganism.
12 helixes, 12 literary arts. The number means something. I'm just saying. You can ask our executive director, but it is definitely about...
Oh, yes, he'll tell you all about 12.
All about number 12.
So, Looking, what's the best experience each of you have had with a student? Or maybe not best, most memorable, to make it a little bit more open.
Specifically with 12, or can it be before 12 and leading into 12?
Sure.
Either one, yeah.
Okay, that one. Then my favorite experiences, it's not just one. My favorite experiences have been with the Barretts. With Eva Barrett and Mary Barrett, I've gotten to work with both of them on their poetry. I've gotten to work with both of them on their performance. I've gotten to see both of them grow in such amazing and just crazy ways. I know their family really well. I feel like the Barretts were the first family artistically that I really feel like I got to connect with and see that the work that I did mattered. So, shout out to the Barretts.
Shout out to the Barretts. For me, I think it was one of these past residencies where we had a student who seemed to, kind of get in trouble with the teacher a lot and didn't want to do this whole thing. It was when we took over the English class. So they kind of had, if you showed up to school, you had to do it.
Right.
But he was like, I don't got no story to tell, blah, blah, blah. And he was talking about, and I was like, well, talk about, your family, but your culture. And he was like, man, culture. He was like, I'm Puerto Rican. Ain't nothing to be proud about.
Wow.
The U.S. has taken us over.
Wow.
What have we done? And so I actually, of course, got on my soapbox and talked about the history of the Taino people and Pedro Aviso Campos and the Nationalists and Lolita Lebron. And I was going on. And then at the end of it, he was actually able to write a dope poem talking about his mom's cooking and the chancla and all these kind of funny references. And it was a great poem. I was it was so kind of not hard to get it out of him, but it took a lot of a lot of reinforcement. It was the journey. And so I appreciate those experiences where it's it clicks and you're able to show these young people that their stories do matter. That's always the thing I'll reiterate. Their stories do matter. So to get them to see that have always been my favorite moment.
And how long did you work with that?
We were there for how many weeks?
Typically it's 8 sessions?
Yeah.
So it's 4 weeks?
4 weeks. Well, no, I think we were there a little bit longer.
Was that the longer one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that would have been more 8
weeks. 8 weeks. So twice a week for 8 weeks. So 16 sessions.
I mean, that also shows the life-changing ability of poetry, because that's such an education in one's culture that you gave that kid, and now he has so much more to be proud of himself and who he is as well.
I mean, it's hard, especially when you grow up in communities where it's you don't see your people being represented in really positive ways, when you only know, the community on the block. And sometimes you can't see the magic that even exists within that because you're told from outside sources, you're told from society, you're told from the news that your community, your people don't matter. You just hear all these sort of prejudices and they're constantly being thrown at you. So it is hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes educating yourself. And especially in a lot of these schools, we're not learning history. How would we be proud of anything when we don't know our history? We learn,
you never hear about Latino history in schools.
You don't ever.
The Chicano movement, you never hear about that.
No, the Chicano movement, the nationalists from Puerto Rico, the banana massacres, all these crazy things that have happened. We can't even hear the truth
about Christopher Columbus, let alone learn the actual history of this island as a territory.
Right. Once we could actually talk about Christopher Columbus and what really happened and stop peddling Thanksgiving as a celebration of the Pilgrims and the natives getting together, we got a lot of work to do on our history. So I think it starts there with how can kids be proud, or not kids, but youth, how can they be proud about where they came from when they don't even know where they came from? So let us take over your history class, too. We'll take over your English class, your history class.
We can teach them all about Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Guam.
Oh, yep.
Oh, Hawaii.
Yeah.
They had embassies.
Oh my God. Like Hawaiian culture is so beautiful. No, we're not even.
Yeah.
Erasure.
we have 5 minutes left. You
Okay,
can't
all right.
do
We
that
don't got time for
subject
that.
We don't
justice.
have time for this.
So anyway, speaking of, I know since we only have 3 minutes left. Any closing statements y'all would like to make?
I'm excited for the future of 12 Literary Arts. I'm excited for the work that we want to do. I'm excited for the programs that we're going to develop. And all I ask as the, new head of youth education is to really be patient with me, to give me time to figure out how to navigate this position in ways that, my peers and people who I've looked to in the future didn't necessarily do it. I want to try to do it in a way that is way more inclusive, way more, open at the same time, way more like communicative. I don't want to feel like there's this barrier of business between us. So, yeah.
And I am the special programs coordinator at 12. So I work with more of the adult programming and anything outside of the youth programming. So if you need poets, if you would like to host a workshop, if you would like to find out how you can work with 12, you can email me, sginese@12arts.org. Find out how you can work with us or find out how you can support our programming.
Yes.
If you're trying to cut us a check, we will gladly accept it.
Listen,
Because we are a nonprofit and we need money to make these programs go and to make sure that our city's youth and adults are being nurtured and cared for in their artistic endeavors.
Down.
And can you do one last reminder for our listeners about your event on July 13th?
Sunday, July 14th, from 5 to 7:30, happening at the Madison. That is 1464 East 105th Street. There is free parking available in the back in our lot. The event is free. There will be an open mic beforehand, so it's definitely something that you don't want to miss.
Yeah, be there. I'll be there.
Again, this has been Voices and Choices, Case Western Reserve University's longest running public affairs show. Stay tuned for more music.